I guess you noticed that Pastor Chris made that introduction when he was out of town. And when he called me, he didn't tell me that he was going out of town. But I have been probably nervous for the last 63 days, 4 hours, and a lot of minutes. What am I going to say? How am I going to hold this conversation with your home church? And as some of you know, I have the opportunity to travel around the world. I've seen things that I could not have imagined. I've been involved in things that I could not have dreamed about. But speaking at your home church is a lot different than any of that. I spent Saturday at my office trying to download all the wonderful things that Andrew had sent me. And Andrew is the guy that he could fix anything. And once he fixed it, you realize, my God, it is too good. I can't do this. And then you try to figure out, how do you call Pastor Chris and say, are you sure you got the right guy for this day? But so what do you do when you're not driven by fear as much as you have such a great respect for the voice of God? You have such a great respect for what God can do in one's life, and you don't take it lightly. You know, of all the places that I've had a chance to speak, from the United Nations to the United States Supreme Court, and when I was in Australia speaking there, it wasn't that difficult, but this is. I mean, this is really, truly difficult. This is a list this is about 20 pages that wonderful Andrew had done that I would not be using because I made a mistake and I prayed the other day. And that's something to keep in mind. You can pray. And if you listen closely enough, you'll hear God. And he'll tell you something that you had not planned on. So I'm in the midst of trying to deliver what he said on Saturday, which was the day before, which was yesterday, not 2 months ago. And I'm coming out of my office, and no one is there. I'm the only car on the parking lot. There's no one supposed to be there on Saturday. And all of a sudden, I see a shadow of a person. And I'm thinking to myself, nobody's supposed to be here. Everybody's gone. And when I get there, there's one of the executives is there with a dolly moving something out. So I hold the door for him. And he asks me, he says, well, Clifton, how's everything going for you? Now, I've known him, but we don't know each other really well. But when there are only two people there, it's kind of easy to have a conversation. You have nobody else to talk to. He said, well, how are things going with you? And I didn't know him well enough to say, but I told him, I said, you know, I have to speak at my church tomorrow. And I'm thinking, this guy does not want to hear that. And I said, and I am scared. I am nervous. I said, I don't know exactly what to say or how to make it come across the way I feel that it should. And he said, well, why don't you just tell him the truth? That's how you feel. And I realized when I got home, I said, you know, that's what I wanted you to know, that I respect your presence so much that I was very concerned that I would say the right things at the right time to my home church. I did not take this for granted. I really wanted to be on key, saying what I should say. And I have 10 points. And I know 10 points work because I had to do a talk for BMW, and the president gave me 13 minutes. And I have learned that in Germany, when they say 13 minutes, they do not mean 14. They actually mean 13 minutes. And so I know now that I can get 10 points in 20 minutes. That's what Chris gave me. So I got 10 points, 2 minutes per point. That's 20 minutes. So it's okay, God, here we go. After talking to this guy, I realized something about unity. But I want to read the 133rd Psalms, and let's just think about that for a minute. Behold how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like a precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, and down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion, for there the Lord bestows his blessings, even life forevermore. I have thought of the word unity all of my life, but I never until recently realized just how important unity is to God. It says in Psalms 133, David saw something thousands of years ago that was so impressed upon his heart that he had in the wee hours of the morning. I can only imagine how he would have gotten up to begin to write or to talk to the scribe. He said, we must recount this. He said, the 12 tribes, all of the people, they're at one place at one time, and they're all together. That was not the life of David. David's life was more about war than togetherness. So when he sees this thing, these people, his kindred, the 12 tribes in one place, all together, he used the word that means so much to me as he talked to himself and others, behold. When I count to 3, I want everybody to say, behold. 1, 2, 3. Behold. Behold. That takes the whole context into a different dimension. David is saying, I saw something that I had not seen in a long time. And I want to capture this. Because sometimes because we haven't seen something in a long time, it doesn't mean that it can't be seen. So David said, and we saw something that blessed his soul. He understood the look when unity was not present. Because he understood tribal war. He understood mistrust. He understood not sharing waters. He understood hunger. He understood my way, your way. He understood kin not speaking. He understood brothers against brothers. He understood the world in which he lived in. But that day, he saw a world of promise. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brethren would dwell together in unity. Behold mean to take a stop. If David was talking to us today in the 21st century, he would tell all of us, guys, I see something. This is amazing. Take out your iPhones and take a screenshot of it. Take a screenshot of this. You got to have this. Or he would say, I want you to inspect this. I want you to take a close look at what I'm seeing. I want you to take a close look at this feeling, this place where people are together. I want you to admire it. I want you to admire this look of brotherhood and sisterhood. But more importantly, I want you to seek to imitate it. I want you to realize that what we are seeing now catches the eye of God. Wow. He said it is both good and pleasant. And my 5th point says, when good and pleasant intermingles and become one, it can't get much better than that. This is what David is telling us thousands of years ago, but have just as much relevance for the 21st century as it did then. The family of humanity dwelling together in unity. That's the goal of God. That's the vision that David saw. That's the prayer of the church. That was Jesus' prayer. Father, make them one as we are one. He understood clearly the power of unity. As a kid growing up on the Mississippi Delta, unity was not something I didn't see, but there was something I heard for 624 Sunday mornings. That's the 12 years of my life. At 8 a.m. on Sunday morning, in this small wooden frame house, the big bed, the cot, the chest of drawers, the rocking chair by the window, and a battery-operated radio. My great aunt would turn the radio on at 7:35 because at 8 o'clock, the Taulbert hour would come on from a place called Mount Bio, Mississippi. And it never started with a song for 12 years. It started with the 133rd Psalm. I heard it all my life. Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brethren dwell together in unity. All my life, I had to sit there for 1 hour before we went to church on Sunday to listen to the Taulbert hour, to hear the 133rd Psalm come through the crackling sounds of a radio, static notwithstanding. My great aunt would not let me leave the room until the 133rd Psalm had been repeated, I had heard it, and with some understanding of the dream that God has for his people. I would sit there, and my great aunt would be in her rocking chair, looking out the window with her head just moving up and down as she listened to this same voice every Sunday for 624 Sundays. I would hear, behold, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. I thought about that when I was trying to figure out my talk today, to realize that even though David said it thousands of years ago, I had heard it scores of years ago myself as a young boy, clearly understanding that unity matters. It was something of significance. It was something of importance. Behold, how good and pleasant it is. But the thing that is so important is that it catches the heart of God. When he sees that, incredible things happen. When he sees his people clearly understanding their purpose. When he sees his people clearly understanding what it means to hold hands and hearts together in an incredible way. I remember when I spoke before the United States Supreme Court, I was being introduced by former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And as she walked to the podium, having been introduced by Dr. John H. Billington, who was the librarian for our country, she looked over where I was seated with my wife and some friends in the Library of Congress main auditorium. And she said, let me introduce my friend, Clifton Taulbert. But I want you to know that he has a story of a life lived because other people poured into his life. And she ended her introduction by saying, no one can accomplish anything alone. We all need each other. And then I thought about unity yesterday. None of us has accomplished anything by ourselves. And when we become bound together in the unity that defines us, the unity that speaks to the Christ that lives inside of us, it allows for things to happen that are absolutely amazing. From my great aunt to bundle me up, get me ready for church on Sundays. I would think that would not have great significance, but when you look back and do a recount of the things that really, truly matter, you begin to understand the acts of faith that brings you together, that helps you to understand the big picture. And I think this is what the 133rd Psalms is giving us, a big picture of the possibilities and what can happen when those possibilities become our reality. As a writer, and I had no idea that a writer lived inside of me, that I would write 15 books, or that I would have the opportunities that I have had. But somewhere along the line, I'm convinced that the gift of faith and the power of a living God was absolutely critical in all that happened. Because I started writing when I was 19. I was a young soldier during the very ending days of the Vietnam War. And I had no reason to believe that I would not be sent to Saigon as most of my friends. And many of them had died and never returned. Some never found. But in the midst of that challenging time, the God who writes with the pen of time just came into the barracks. And when my roommates were gone, I would sit on the floor with my back up against the cinder block wall. And he would take me back to Glen Allen, Mississippi, this very small agrarian place. And I would remember the people that were absolutely important to my life. I would remember the people that gave life to the word unity. I would remember them. And I began to write just on a yellow pad, no laptop, pencil, yellow pads. And I would sit and write and write and write with no idea of what I was writing or what would become of the writing. It took me 24 years to get my first book published, but I never gave up because I felt somehow that God had written within those pages a journey toward unity, because he never changes. And when you align yourself with him, you end up with his agenda, not your own. And that sometimes is very difficult, to allow the agenda of God to be the guide rather than the agenda that we would create for ourselves. And I think, again, this is why David, I would think, maybe having seen this at the year-end celebration when all of the priests would come together and all of the tribes would be in one place, that he would say to himself, I've seen something that's absolutely amazing. I have to write this down. I have to write it down for posterity, because I'm not sure I'll see it again. But because I've seen it once, I know that it is possible. Behold how good and pleasant it is for the children of God, for the brothers and sisters of the kingdom, to dwell together in unity. And the unity that we dwell in is not for our purpose alone, but it is for the purpose of God, to bring others unto him. For he has said, you will be a tree, you will be a branch, you will be known by the fruit you bear. And the unity that we bear represents the God that we serve. And when he sees unity, it becomes absolutely an incredible opportunity for us to see and do the will of God. I remember I'd gone to Sydney to work at Charles Sturt University. We were doing talks primarily on innovation and entrepreneurship and things like that. And then one day they said, well, Mr. Taulbert, you're going to have to fly to Dubbo, to an outskirt university. And that's the university that most of the Aboriginals would have attended. So we flew to a city, and then we drove from that city to Dubbo. And I remember getting to Dubbo. The whole town was closed down. The whole town. Because this guy from Tulsa, Oklahoma was coming to talk. I will never forget that. The whole town closed down. The auditorium, from the grandmas, the grandpas, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the little babies, there was not even a room for a fly to get in. It was so packed. And the president of the college said, "We have never seen anything like this before." And I was introduced by a guy named Uncle John Hill. And he was the head of one of the Aboriginal clans. He was in his 90s. And when he walked up to the podium to introduce me, they were playing their ancient instruments, just lined up across the auditorium. And I just stood there. And he said to me, to them, when I was there, he said, "I have lived all of my life to see this day. Now I can die." And he walked over and he shook my hand. And I began to talk about community and the power of community. I began to talk about the 8 habits of the heart. This incredible story of how unselfishness looks. This incredible story that had caught the attention of Justice O'Connor. This incredible story that had gotten me an invitation to Brussels, Belgium. This incredible story of unselfishness, not of my unselfishness, but the unselfishness of people that I had watched their lives. And the memory of God brought those memories back to me. And I began to write these stories. And that's what we talked about in Dubbo. We didn't talk about the 133rd Psalms, but we talked about the 8 habits of the heart. We talked about community. And community does not exist without unity, because unity is the sole source of community. And so I often laugh at the wisdom of God, the strategy of the Lord. For many places, his word is not necessarily welcomed. And for many places, his word does not have a place on the front desk. But somehow, he baked his word into this small book in ways that has just absolutely amazed me. For in the pages of 8 Habits of the Heart, let me just read something to you that today many of us need to define and redefine the meaning of community. When I ask the question, what is community? Most people answer by immediately recalling a geographical location, a place where they once lived. However, as I have come to understand over the years and through listening to others, the full concept of community is much bigger, with consequences far beyond the place where we first experience the touch of others in our lives. It is really the touch that defines community in every age. And that, to me, is what David was talking about in the 133rd Psalms. He gave us a sense of the touch. What comes from us to define community? And he said, this is how God would do it. And then he writes this, behold how good and pleasant it is Good enough, if he had just said good, that would have been great. But he added pleasant. Not only, it's just, it can't get too much better than that. It is so powerful. And to understand that God would take a kid from Glen Allen, Mississippi, sitting on a cot in the front room of his great aunt's house, listening to a battery-operated radio when the Taborian hour would come on at 8 o'clock every Sunday morning. And they would start with the same chapter, the same scripture for 624 Sundays. Mount Bayou, Mississippi was established in 1887. Enslavement was just barely over when the Ben Montgomery families from Davis Bend, Mississippi, set out on a journey to create a town of their own. And they created this town in the Delta. But what was so amazing, God was there with them. A town that still exists today, that you wonder how it came about. But when you understand the faith that traveled with them from Davis Bend to Mount Bayou, it's amazing to understand who we serve and the majesty of his power and the graciousness of God and what it means to be his son and what it means to be his daughter. Every day of my life, I take a step back and I try and remember all that God has done. And sometimes as a human being, you try to take a little credit for yourself. You know, you try to say, well, I went to college, I went to graduate school, I did this, I did that. But when you walk out on the pathway of your life and you see the journey clearly, you clearly see the hand of God. You clearly see his footsteps. You clearly see his love guiding us. And as I go to my second page from Saturday morning, I said in my fourth book, which was 8 Habits of the Heart, I explore the impact of the unity I encountered. Ordinary people dreaming your best life. And that's what we all have the opportunity to do. And as I'm getting fairly to a close, my first unity conversation was in March of this year. And most of my friends know that I have no athletic abilities at all. I talked to Michael Jordan for 12 or 13 minutes, shook his hand and everything, and still had no idea who he was. I kept saying, this guy really looks familiar, but I had no idea who he was. Well, it gets better. I get a call from the NCAA. That's sports. That's Indianapolis, Indiana. And I answered the phone. They said, at the end of the Final Four, Mr. Taulbert, we want you to give the closing talk for the Final Four. And I said, are you sure? Because Final Four, that's a lot of basketball. But then again, even though it was for another setting, another place, another time, I've come to the conclusion that as good as Michael Jordan was, he will never be as great a player as God is. So I said, okay, Lord, you got a job on your hand. You're taking this non-athlete into the NCAA to give a speech to the whole world of athletics. And they wanted me to talk about unity. They wanted me to talk about how do you recover from the lack of unity. How do you become a champion? How do you win? And I said to the one young man that I talked to, I said this. When I took my son to San Antonio, that's where I met Michael Jordan, one of the last times that the Chicago Bulls, I do know the name, that the Chicago Bulls were playing. Marshall was with me and two of his friends. And we were there. And I told the guy at the NCAA, I said, yeah, I understand what you want me to try and accomplish. I said, but I remember when Michael Jordan came out on the court. I mean, the place just went into thunderous applause. MJ, MJ. I mean, it was like no one else was there. But when the buzzer sounded, the whole team came out. And the team won. And I understood for all of us, myself included, the buzzer will ring many times in all of your life. And none of you will ever have to be on the court by yourself. He will always be there with you. He will always be there to get you through the game. And whatever challenges you might face, you'll always have a winning player on your side, on your team. You know, unity is absolutely amazing. Absolutely and completely amazing. I don't know if we fully understand it, but this is what David said. At the presence of unity, God commanded the blessings. At the very presence of unity, God commanded the blessings and even life forevermore. The action on our part is find ourselves on the journey toward unity, and we will find ourselves on the road to everlasting life. Before I go, let's have a little prayer real quickly. Lord, from ages past, you've left a record of who you are and what you demand of us and what you can accomplish through us. Help us all to understand that we can build up each other in the faith that sustains us all. And we can all have our days, our 624 days and hours, weeks, months of hearing the 133rd Psalms ring into our hearts, calling us to action. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brethren dwell together in unity. Bless our hearts to your life and to your service. Amen.